Hello guys and welcome back to the F1 Tube YouTube channel, and in today's video I will be doing the last of my 3 mid-season reviews, and in today's mid-season review I will be covering the top 3 teams: Mercedes, Red Bull and Ferrari. The 3 runaway teams in the sport ever since 2016 really. So let's start off with Red Bull, and coming into 2019 there were fears within the team that Red Bull would fall into the depths of the midfield as they have a new partnership with Honda, but coming into the summer break that definitely has not been the case, as they have recorded a pole position, podium finishes and race victories. Well, obviously courtesy of one driver, but still a very good start to the partnership. And I would personally argue that Red Bull have been the second quickest team behind Mercedes in the last 4 or 5 Grand Prix. Their development throughout this season alone has been brilliant. Here's the thing with Red Bull: they operate at such a high level. Their intensity is brilliant, and when you give them an opportunity they will seize it, and that's what makes them so good. They're not fighting for titles at the moment, but they will nick race wins just through being a brilliant team in general. Red Bull's best race of 2019 for me has to be the Austrian Grand Prix, where they started P2 with Max Verstappen, and despite a woeful start they still managed to win the Grand Prix with him at a power circuit, which also shows that Honda have been developing thoroughly. And I would argue Red Bull were arguably the quickest on race day. Not dominant in terms of pace, but at least the second quickest. They were way ahead of Mercedes, which is a very good look. For Red Bull's worst race, I have gone for the Canadian Grand Prix. It's a power circuit. Red Bull weren't quite developed at that point, and they were just nowhere. Max Verstappen was knocked out in Q2 by, let's say, a debatable strategy by Red Bull trying to qualify him on the harder tyres into Q3. So yeah, he was knocked out in Q2. Pierre Gasly did get into Q3, but in the Grand Prix he had absolutely no pace, and the best Red Bull could finish was P5. Let's go to the drivers now, and I'm going to start off with Pierre Gasly, who for the 12 races of 2019 has been woeful and fully deserves to be dropped to Toro Rosso. And guys, if you want to know my reactions to that move, please check out that video which I posted a couple of days ago. And back to Pierre in 2019. Through the 12 races of 2019, he has lost 11-1 in qualifying and the Grand Prix to Verstappen. Yes, I know Verstappen is unbelievably talented, but those stats just don't give Pierre any justice. To rub salt in the wounds further, Pierre was lapped by his teammates at certain events, and he's also been behind the midfield at certain events, i.e. McLarens and Renaults. That's not good enough. I don't care what anyone says. Yes, I know he's a good driver, but his performances have been dire, with a capital D. Now I hope Pierre learns his trade once more at Toro Rosso for the rest of 2019, but his career, their last 12 races have been damaging. Pierre's best race of the season has to be the British Grand Prix, because A, it was his best finish, P4, B, it was the only time he really looked like challenging his teammates, even though he was slower in the end. And C, it was the only time he went toe-to-toe with the Ferraris, for example, overtaking Sebastian Vettel. And yes, I know in the Grand Prix the Red Bull was quicker, but it was Pierre's most competitive race. For Pierre's worst race, I've gone with A, the Austrian Grand Prix, where he was lapped by his teammates who went on to win the Grand Prix, and he finished behind Lando Norris in the McLaren. And B, I have gone for the Hungarian Grand Prix, where he was a second off his teammates who was on pole, and then was lapped by his teammates in the Grand Prix and finished behind Carlos Sainz, and only finished 4 seconds ahead of Valtteri Bottas, who made 2 stops, had a front wing damaged on lap 1 and had to come through the field. That's just embarrassing. And he was even half a minute at least behind the Ferraris, who were easily slower than the Red Bull that weekend. Not good enough. Nowhere near. Now let's turn our attention to probably one of the worst drivers of 2019 to easily the best driver of 2019. Max Verstappen has just been the phoenix of all drivers this season, with him just outperforming his car in just about every race with some stunning drives along the way. Also, Max's maturity has just been booming, especially after the Monaco Grand Prix last year. He has composed himself and he is just a different lion. And even at weekends where that Red Bull car is not competitive, Verstappen is just doing the job, and he's doing it brilliantly, getting the points for the team, which is much needed considering on the other side of the garage there is not that many points being scored. There's not much more I need to say. Max's best drive for me is the Austrian Grand Prix. Went into anti-stall at the start, which wasn't his fault, but he fought back brilliantly, blistering pace, blistering overtakes, and won the Grand Prix. Regardless of how quick you think that Red Bull was that weekend, Max did the job, and my word, it was an emphatic and just fantastic win. Max has just been so good this year that it's so hard to find his worst race, but I'm going to go for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And saying this is his worst race just shows you how good he's been this year, because he was not terrible, he was not even bad, he was still very, very solid this weekend. But I've gone with this race because his teammate Pierre Gasly was actually quite competitive against him on pure pace, but Max still did have the upper hand. In qualifying, Max did the best he could, but in the Grand Prix, he fell behind Sergio Perez at the start, and that was just his race run. He still did have solid pace, but he couldn't make much of it. Definitely not his most spectacular drive, but at the end of the day, like I said earlier, he was getting the points for the team. So still a decent drive, but if you're comparing it to some of his other drives, it was just lacking something. But again, Max has just been so good this year, and although I don't believe he can mount a title challenge, this cannot detract the fact that Max has just been spectacular. Coming into 2019, Ferrari was set to be the favourites, but my god, they have been so disappointing. The car is far from the best on the field at the moment, or in fact throughout the whole season. The drivers are not operating at the highest level, the team's a mess, and the leadership is just not good enough for Ferrari. Ferrari, such a big name in motorsport, yet there's this leadership which I'm sorry is not good enough for this famous team. Apart from that, I just cannot say nothing else. Ferrari have just been so disappointing again, and their search for a title in terms of constructors and drivers will go on for at least another year. Ferrari's best race of 2019, in my opinion, is the Canadian Grand Prix, because the pace was good in that car. The Ferrari as a team did not make any mistakes reliability or strategically, and although their appeal after Sebastian Vettel's penalty in France was absolutely, well, rubbish, to put it lightly, yeah, Ferrari were operating at a reasonable level, and it was down to the driver and FIA which cost them the win, with Vettel's mistake and the FIA's decision. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole stewarding debate, but at least Ferrari scored some solid points with a double podium, Seb P2 and Charles P3. For Ferrari's worst race in terms of pace, I'd say the Australian and Hungarian Grand Prix, where in both races they finished a minute behind the victor, being Valtteri Bottas at Australia and Lewis Hamilton at the Hungaroring. But the Spanish Grand Prix for me tops that, or bottoms that, or whatever you want to say, as they were just a laughingstock that entire Grand Prix. The pace weren't that great, and the team orders saga was just absolutely hilarious. Just looking at how Ferrari were just tripping over their own feet. It was absolutely remarkable, considering that they were just too conservative in terms of team orders, losing so much time, and I think this was a very strong public image to how much of a mess Ferrari are at the moment. Now, Seb Vettel has endured a tough 2019, but he has definitely been the better Ferrari driver so far this year. I don't think he's made as many mistakes as Leclerc. I do believe he has been more consistent. However, Vettel has made mistakes at the end of the day. Use Bahrain, Canada and Silverstone as prime examples. And I don't believe Vettel has been as charismatic on track in terms of speed and racecraft. However, Vettel has just done a better job over Leclerc. End of. Seb's best race of the season for me was the German Grand Prix, where he started P20 and came back to P2. He didn't make any mistakes during the Grand Prix, and in a race of high attrition, he kept his head down, and he fully deserved that P2, and it was one of the few races where he didn't make any mistakes. Yes, I know, his pace in the wet wasn't exactly blistering, but he did not make any mistakes, and I think this was a really underrated drive, and after the luck that went against him, he fought back really well. His worst race, the British Grand Prix, qualified P6 behind both Red Bulls and his teammate Charles Leclerc, about a half second off his teammates. Not good enough, but he lucked out in the race as he benefited from a safety car to jump into P3, and you can kind of accept that as long as you take that opportunity, and Vettel didn't. He crashed into Verstappen and came home about P17 outside the points, a day where Vettel needed to take every opportunity and he didn't. And at the end of the day, you've just got to look at it. He had no pace and was making another mistake. Now, Charles Leclerc, and I do believe, like Vettel, his work has been cut out considering the Ferrari car hasn't been that great, but I don't think Charles Leclerc has been consistent enough to satisfy himself for this season. He's made too many mistakes, really. Crashed out in qualifying in Baku, and obviously crashed out whilst possibly going on to win the race in Germany. Leclerc has really screwed himself over with some costly errors. But you've got to look at it also, in his first season for Ferrari, there's a lot of pressure on him, so he isn't doing too bad, but I don't think he's been exactly excellent. Leclerc's best race has to be the Bahrain Grand Prix, where he scored his maiden pole position, and although he got a poor start, he bounced back with some supreme pace, and it was only of reliability errors that plagued him of his maiden win. Leclerc was just so good that weekend. Now, Leclerc's worst race of the season for me is his home event, the Monaco Grand Prix, and despite Ferrari really screwing over his weekend, Leclerc basically ignored the team. He played way too high of a risk in the Grand Prix, risking crashing out, and that's basically what he did. Whilst going for an overtake on Nico Hülkenberg, he hit the wall, he got himself a puncture, and he drove way too aggressively in the pit lane. Despite how Ferrari turned against him, it would feel like to him, during the course of the weekend, you cannot do that. At the end of the day, Ferrari aren't that stupid, and he should have listened to them. Now, finally, Mercedes, who have once more been the class of the field, and although their dominance has dwindled a tiny bit in the past 6 races, their ascendancy across the span of 2019 has just been relentless. And even when they hit poor weekends, they somehow bounce back, and that's what makes this team so legendary. Mercedes' best race of 2019, in my opinion, has to be the season opener in Australia, because their pace was just unbelievable. They were so much quicker than all the other teams, and no one expected them to be that dominant. With an easy 1-2 in the qualifying sessions, and of course the Grand Prix, with Valtteri Bottas heading Lewis Hamilton on the Sunday with probably his best ever drive. Easily Mercedes' worst race of 2019 has to be probably one of the most commemorative Grand Prix in their history, the German Grand Prix, obviously with all the celebrations taking place, but the Grand Prix was an absolute disaster. Despite dominating the first half of the race, in the second half it just all fell to pieces. Just guys, to let you know, this is also both Lewis Hamilton's and Valtteri Bottas' worst races of the season. Firstly, Hamilton crashed out from the lead, then the Mercedes pit wall just descended into chaos. Hamilton dropped back and never really recovered. Valtteri Bottas also crashed out, but this time he was out of the race for good, compounding a catastrophic day for the team. Lewis Hamilton heads into the summer break as the championship leader, and it's fair to say Hamilton has been brilliant this season, but I don't think it has been his best opening to a season in his Formula 1 career. Now, this is because I don't believe Hamilton has been pushed as much as he has been in the last few years. The Mercedes car has been a bit more dominant this season, so Hamilton hasn't been pushed to the limit as much as I do believe he can be. Now, this is nothing against Valtteri Bottas, he is a very good driver, but Hamilton relishes battles against drivers other than his teammates. Now, Hamilton has outdriven his car at certain Grand Prix, there's no denying that, like Monaco, for example. However, I think Hamilton, at certain races, I feel like there is more in him. Now, back to the point, Hamilton has been brilliant this year. He's won 8 out of the 12 races so far, and he's also maintained some of his main qualities. His racecraft, used his racecraft in Bahrain against Bottas and Vettel, for example. It was relentless. Use his defensive abilities as an example in Monaco, where he was absolutely phenomenal. That defensive drive against Verstappen was absolutely brilliant, and I don't care what anyone says, that was a legend at work. But here's the thing that does slightly downgrade Hamilton's 2019 season. Hamilton is indicative of supreme qualifying performances. That has not exactly been the case in the 2019 season. He, in my eyes, has struggled to get the Pirelli tyres initially working to the max. I think in terms of endurance, Hamilton works those Pirelli tyres to the max, but in terms of one lap pace, he doesn't seem to fire them up as much. Use the Spanish Grand Prix as an example. He was blitzed by Bottas in qualifying, was out-qualified by Bottas by about 0.6 of a second. But in the Grand Prix, Hamilton bounced back with an emphatic win. He was so dominant over Bottas on that Sunday. I think that was just a trademark Hamilton 2019 weekend. And yes, I do believe Hamilton is almost imminently going to be rewarded with a 6th World Championship. Hamilton's best races of the season, I'm going to go for the Monaco Grand Prix with that spectacular defensive drive against Verstappen. How he kept Verstappen behind and did not make a single mistake for about 60 laps for me just shows how good of a driver Lewis is. And I'm also going for the French Grand Prix where he was just utterly dominant, crushed everyone that laid in his grasp. But Lewis always seems to get stronger after the summer break, and if that is a streak that will continue this year, then that looks ominous for his rivals. Valtteri Bottas started off 2019 in a very strong manner. He won 2 out of the opening 4 Grand Prix and was looking set to really take the fight to Lewis Hamilton. But ever since race day at the Spanish Grand Prix, Bottas for me has really dropped off. Despite maintaining his high qualifying standards in 2019, he just lacks so much in the Grand Prix aggression, racecraft and just natural speed. And now Bottas lies in this predicament with basically, he could lose his Mercedes seat for 2020. It's between him and Esteban Ocon for that second Mercedes seat, and it doesn't look good for the Finnish driver, as I think Ocon will get that seat for next season. Bottas' best race of the season for me was easily the Australian Grand Prix, defeating Lewis Hamilton by over 20 seconds. It was a phenomenal drive. Got the start spot on, got the fastest lap, and his pace was just phenomenal. Now guys, during the summer break I will do an extra video on Valtteri Bottas about his 2019 season so far and whether he will keep his Mercedes seat for next season, as I do believe there are a load of variables to consider. So guys, that is it for today's video and my mid-season reviews. Please like this video, comment down below what you thought of my mid-season review today and the series, or if you can call it a series, in general, and please subscribe to the F1 Tube YouTube channel. And until next time guys, see you later.